Let's check and see. Okay. Bum, bum, bum. I close my page. Come here. Alright. Oh, I need to bring that back up for later. So, another day, another chapter. Let's get into chapter 5. So we finished chapter 4 with the Year of Reckoning 146. We're starting with the end of the Republic, the late Roman Republic, and getting into the start of the Empire. So, the chapter starts with the Roman Republic controlling the entirety of the Mediterranean. It was no longer in the hands of the Carthaginians and the Greeks, but was now, as a number of historians like to say, at least the ones that I often find for my videos, the Mediterranean Sea was a Roman lake. So, obviously, with conquering the Mediterranean, Rome secured lots of wealth. I mean, they were the economy in the Mediterranean. And also peace. I mean, the biggest threat to Rome was Carthage for their entire existence. I mean, even when Carthage was an ally to some degree, they were always the biggest threat. Well, Carthage is gone. The biggest threat they have is some barbarian tribes to the north, I guess. So now, with all this excess wealth and these exotic customs, from the east, the Romans are more exposed to greed and corruption. Not that they weren't before, but they've got, let's say, less stopping them. And then, of course, with Rome literally having a religion of war, peace isn't really a good thing for Rome, which is weird. Unlike, say, Sparta, which you would think of as a more war-based civilization, but they were more about staying at home and keeping the slaves from rising up and overthrowing them, whereas the Romans were more about conquering. Also, the Roman Republic worked for Rome as a city, as a city-state, as a small area. But now Rome existed as, well, the entire Mediterranean, as this huge empire in all but name. It was this massive area across, from Spain to, well, I've got a map here. Yeah, from Spain all the way to, what is that, Syria, Armenia, Mesopotamia, down to Egypt, all the way, well, we're not quite to Britannia yet. I guess talking about senatorial provinces is probably about where we would be in 150 BC. So still though, as far east as Asia Minor there, as far west as still parts of Spain, and then northern Africa. So yeah, it's getting large. It's getting difficult to manage. So this was something I kind of talked about before, and again, you guys don't need to know these numbers, or really all these different names either. Again, the only ones you really need to know is the consuls. But with all this power in Rome, there's only so many offices you could hold. So let's see here. The Quaesitor, magistrates and investigators, 20, tribunes, representatives, 10, adelaides, which are magistrates, 4, praetors, 8, and then of course the consuls had 2. That's not a lot of guys. So in order to get these positions of power, the various patricians were absolutely cutthroat, sometimes quite literally. They built alliances, used clientage to push votes in their favor, and just corrupted the system to get what they wanted. And, that's pretty par for the course, politics. Yeah. As I talked about before, how clientage was used, where they would basically essentially buy entire sections of the assembly, the lower house, the common people. And hey, if you've got some rich dude that's basically paying for all your stuff, has essentially bought you a house and has pretty much set you up for life, you're going to be beholden to him. He's going to say, hey, I want you to vote this way, or I'm going to take all that stuff back. Yeah, you're gonna vote the way he wants you to. Also, and this was something that this is something they tried to fix with how the U.S. system works, but anyway, these public service positions did not pay. The idea was that rather than make it so that you would take these positions to make money, you would take these positions for the betterment of Rome. Because, that's what a good Roman would do. All you want in your heart as a good Roman is for Rome to succeed. Which, that makes sense, but people are people, and people are going to use these positions to benefit themselves. They're going to pass laws or acts or whatever to make sure that they themselves are going to wind up with more money than they started with. And like I said, sure is nice that that's been fixed, huh? Not a thing we have to deal with anymore, right? So again, here's just real quick the various groups: the Quaesitors, tribunes, adelaides, praetors, consuls. You got the dictator up to one side, but that's just the just in case. All right, so we've got the Gracchi brothers. Now, this is a lot. Um, did you need to know who these two guys are? Um, you need to know just kind of the difference between the two of them, essentially, for the test. They did a lot. Um, and the main thing is they got the ball rolling on stuff that would really begin unraveling Rome. So, we have the Gracchi brothers. They're Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. Apparently, the plural of Gracchus is Gracchi because in Rome there was plurals for surnames, I guess. Anyway, they're descendants of Scipio Africanus, the guy that defeated Hannibal, and therefore are part of a long line of very important Romans. So, one of the things that really started their reform movement, they witnessed a slave revolt in Sicily, which was due in large part to the large number of slaves that were pretty much running the agriculture in Rome, which wasn't the problem. The problem wasn't the slavery. It was that, again, this for the Romans, this wasn't the problem. I'm not saying that, for me, slavery, whatever. The problem was that this meant that small farmers couldn't work and could not compete with the larger farmers, the latifundii, which were essentially these huge plantations that had all these slaves. So this is something we actually will see much later in history as well. But like the idea was slavery, the institution wasn't the problem, but the fact that the rich landowners could use this to basically outmaneuver the small landowners was the issue. So the majority of the population that fought for Rome, the guys in the legions, because, obviously when you've got groups of dudes that are 50 to 60,000 strong, most of those are going to be plebeians. Most of those are going to be regular guys. When they get back home, they don't have any land. They don't have any income. They're out of luck. And as Rome is growing more and more, and we're going to more or less, most of the soldiers' job is to garrison these distant lands. So they're just standing watch in lands that aren't technically Rome, aren't their homeland. Meanwhile, back at home, they have no land to call their own. That didn't sit right. So Tiberius became a tribune, which again, you don't really need to worry too much about what a tribune does, but that just means it's a higher position than, like, he worked in the assembly. And he pushed a land reform bill to cut the massive plantations to let landless citizens have their small farms again. Obviously, the Senate, many in the Senate opposed this because, well, Many in the Senate were the rich plantation owners to begin with. And they convinced another tribune to veto it because, well, that's what another tribune could do. They were the same power. So Tiberius then went to the assembly, which is the assembly of the common folks, and had them get rid of the tribune that vetoed his bill, and then had them vote on an even stronger land bill. Oops. So this bill did pass, and the Senate responded by cutting the funding because the Senate can be petty like that. So Tiberius stood for re-election, which wasn't something you were allowed to do as tribune. You were tribune for, I think, a year, maybe 2 years, and then you were done. Tiberius decided to try to get reelected. This was not allowed, and just for trying to be reelected, the Senate had a mob hunt him down and beat him and 300 of his men to death. And even after all this, the Senate still passed the bill. So I don't know what even all that was about, but this is typical Roman politics in action. So yeah, I don't know. I can't really. This isn't my area of history, so I can't really give you guys too much in depth as to what the hell they were thinking, what was going on in their heads with this. Here we have the senatorial mob just bludgeoning these dudes. Also, when I was looking up images for Tiberius Gracchus, I found this for some reason, and I figured I'd include it. So there he is. Despite being killed, he still got his way, so, it worked out. Now, obviously we're talking about both of the brothers, so let's move on to Gaius Gracchus. Gaius was the younger brother. 10 years after the death of Tiberius, Gaius became tribune and was even more aggressive in his land reforms than Tiberius. My throat is killing me. This weather change. So he pushed a number of things besides just land reform, which again, the land reform was getting land to the common citizens. He wanted soldiers to be outfitted at the Republic's expense, which, by the way, meant that before, if you were going to be in one of the Roman legions, you had to provide your own weapons and armor. So, like the dudes in those videos that I'm sure you've all watched, going up against Hannibal with their shields and swords and armor, they had to pay for their own stuff. So that's nice. Imagine, well, I guess you don't have to imagine because that's not entirely unheard of. In the military, we have to pay for your own equipment. It's like, wow, thanks. We're going to send us out to die with stuff we had to pay for. Thanks so much. It's kind of fuzzy. I shouldn't go too much into that because I've not been in the military, but I do know that that's sometimes the case where it's like you get the we'll give you like the first round of equipment, but like any replacement you have to pay for, and the first round of equipment, from what I've heard, they give you is always like the absolute shittiest possible, so it wears out really quickly. And it's like, oh well, you gotta get it replaced. Anyway, that's just from what I've heard. Moving on, I'm getting off track. Right. He wanted soldiers to be outfitted at the rebellious expense, colonies in places like Carthage, free grain for citizens of Rome. He also appealed to the equestrians, who were this knightly class, who were just below the patricians, to get more power. Suggested full Roman citizenship for Latin allies, which would further diminish the power that the nobles had. So he was pushing for a lot. This dude was going well beyond what his brother had attempted, and he was somehow getting away with it, or at least putting these things into words and not being immediately murdered. So when he failed to secure a third term as tribune, which, if you recall, just a moment ago, his brother was killed because he tried to run a second time. Gaius ran twice, attempted to run a third time, lost, and then the Senate began to undo his work. His supporters started to become violent. Consul declared martial law. 3,000 of Gaius' supporters were killed. His head was presented to the Senate to collect on a bounty. So yeah, things went crazy. But, and, well, I shouldn't say but just yet. And both of these men were killed, and many of their reforms, as we're going to see here in just a little bit, were soon done away with. But you can't kill an idea. These ideas would spread throughout the land and make things more difficult for, well, Rome in general. So here we have, I believe this is Gaius about to get run through by this crowd. Dude here is going to go ahead and, where's my mouse, take himself out rather than get torn apart by the mob. Now, again, this guy isn't super important in the grand scheme of things, but he is part of this cascading series of events that utterly shatters the Roman Republic. So, he was this was a king in North Africa. So he was around while all the stuff with the Gracchi brothers was going on. And the book mentions that a lot was happening at that time. The city of Rome was shaken by lawlessness and mob violence. Year 111, two Vestal virgins were found guilty of breaking their vows of chastity and were buried alive. Theaters were suspected of undermining morality and were censored. When consulted the Sibyl, a prophetic female, ordered a drastic remedy. 2 Greeks and 2 Gauls were to be sacrificed to the gods. Finally, a great fire struck Rome, destroying much of the city. And that's all in 1 year. So, Rome is freaking out. While this is happening, Jugurtha is doing his thing in North Africa. He had risen to power through deceit and murder, and somehow ended up pissing off Rome. Can't imagine how. And sent agents to senators to bribe them to leave him alone. In 111, an army was sent to North Africa to basically put down all the chaos that he was whipping up, and he bribed the consul that was in charge of the army, and the consul went on his merry way. He was ordered to Rome, actually did go to Rome, but bribed a tribune to get him out before the Senate hearing. But while he was there, he had a rival to his throne murdered, and for the next 5 years evaded those who sought his capture. So here's our boy Jugurtha. Yeah, he was something else. I really should get my mother to watch some of these, like, dramatized historical shows, because they're basically soap operas. She would like it. It's like, what was the one relatively recently? Isabella? Talking about Queen Isabella? Or no, not Isabella, Cleopatra. She'd be into that. Unfortunately, it's on those, like, really fancy pay-per-view channels, or not pay-per-view, like streaming channels that she 100% doesn't have. But, like, this sort of thing, they sent an army to him, so he found the guy in charge and, like, paid him off. They finally got him to Rome, and while he was there, he had one of his rivals killed, and then, like, paid a guy to get him out. Like, this would make a pretty great, if not movie, maybe a series, or a little mini-series. Like, this is something else. Because this is not where it ends. So quick aside, this is something I briefly mentioned before, that the way that the consoles typically work, I mean, yeah, there were 2 so that they could balance each other out, but typically the way it was meant to be was that one stayed in Rome to lead the Senate, and the other went out and did the war stuff. Because obviously, doing the war stuff is how you win your glory, and everybody wants glory. So you go out, you lead your army, win your glory, you come back to Rome, you take over the Senate stuff, and the other guy goes out and does his war stuff. That's how it's meant to be. However, as we're getting to the late Republic, the Republic's starting to fall apart. The consuls are starting to use their position for personal gain, because of course. So, Gaius Marius, another Gaius. Excuse me. So, um, he was a man of middling birth. He wasn't quite a plebeian. He wasn't, a peasant or anything. But he certainly wasn't a patrician. He had decent, um, he had a decent family, but he certainly wasn't, high class. Um, he was no Scipio Africanus. Anyway, so they're fighting Jugurtha for 5 years. That's 5 senators. Or not 5 senators. 5 senators. 5 consuls, technically. Um, so Gaius Marius gets elected consul, and in addition to getting all this glory from winning battles, the consul also gets a large share of the loot and slaves won from the battle, because when you win the battle, you take the other army's stuff, and the other army's, well, the people that are still alive as prisoners, and then therefore as slaves. And traditionally, the leader gets like 50% of it, and then the remaining 50% are distributed among the rest of the army. And then the leader can choose to give some of that remaining 50% to certain lieutenants or whatnot to make them more loyal. What he did do, though, and this is something that I talked about when we spoke of the clientage system before, is he used the clientage system to bind entire legions to him. So, as we were talking about with the clientage with like senators and stuff, where you're basically adopted into this rich dude's family. I don't want to say Elon Musk because he's not human. I don't know, Darla Moore, she runs this place. If she comes in and is like, hey, I'm going to adopt you into my family, I'm going to pay you like, I don't know, but 15 grand a month or something. Get you a new house, new car, just set you up for life. Continue doing whatever you're doing or whatever you want to do. I don't care. But when I need something, when I need you to do something, you come and do it. Yeah, all right. Well, this dude used this system to have entire legions. That's 30. Well, how many legions were 3,000 to 5,000 per legion. Basically, he would use this system to, quote, adopt entire legions to be loyal to him, which is, I don't know if that was on the books, but that doesn't sound legal. That would be like well, not a general, because the general was in charge of a lot of dudes, but like an army captain, or maybe, well, not a colonel either. Maybe a colonel. But like him paying his soldiers rather than the army. And so the soldiers are loyal to him and not the army. You can start to see where that becomes a problem. So yeah, that was immediately an issue. It doesn't go quite where you, well, it sort of goes where you expect it to go, but not as dramatically. Anyway, his troops were the ones that captured Jugurtha. from the last slide. I told you he was important. But Gaius wasn't there. Because again, this dude is consul. He's got legions and legions and legions under his control. I mean, we talked again about the battle of I want to say Caronium, but that's not right. Shoot. What was that big battle? Battle of Cannae. Where not Napoleon, where Hannibal fought like 50,000, 80,000 Romans. Yeah, that was the amount that like a single consul could run, and that's what this guy had. So the group that got their hands on Jugurtha were technically under the control of a man named Sulla, who took credit for Jugurtha's capture. So while Sulla was technically under the command of Gaius Marius, he took the credit for the capture because, well, he was there. So that's going to cause a lot of issues going forward, and hoo boy, it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot. Also, Gaius was elected consul 5 times in a row, which was definitely illegal. Like I said, I'm pretty sure making legions your clients is illegal, but I don't know if that was on the books back then. It certainly was after Gaius did it. But being consul 5 straight times definitely was illegal, because you're supposed to be made consul once, and then you were done. Or maybe like you could be elected consul once, and then you couldn't be elected consul the next year, but maybe you could be elected consul later in the future. Maybe, I'm not sure. I don't think that's how it worked. I think it was you could be consul for 1 year, and then that was it. That was your legacy. Not for 5 years in a row. So we've got a lot of laws and norms and such being very much ignored in Rome as the Republic is crumbling. So here is, I think this is supposed to be Sulla being cheered on after they've captured Jugurtha. Also, real quick here, you can see the, I guess this will be geese flying overhead in their typical delta pattern. That would be another nod to the flight patterns of birds thing. My rain just shut off. Asparagus. So yeah. So, Jugurtha was not the end of the trouble for Rome. Rome's Italian allies had revolted when they were denied Roman citizenship, which, if you recall, was something that Gaius Gracchus had suggested. And while that was not something that had necessarily happened, the ideal got out there, and the Italian allies were very, very unhappy about not being allowed to be citizens. Because, again, if you're... second to put my words together. If you're an ally, air quote, of Rome, you still have to pay taxes. You still have to give citizens to Rome to be legions, to die for Rome. But you don't get to vote. You don't get benefits from the Roman government. You don't get road building or civic construction. You get all the negatives and none of the positives. So becoming citizens would be good for them, but the leaders in Rome didn't want that because it would mean more representatives would come into the Senate and it would make their power weaker because there would be more people voting, and more people voting means each vote counts slightly less. They don't want that. So Marius went out to fight them, got his butt kicked. Sulla went out and fought them as well on his own. I mean, obviously not on his own, but leading men as well. Did a little better. However, the Senate gave in and agreed to the rebels' demands. They allowed these Italian allies, essentially Latin people from way back at the start of chapter 4, to become part of Rome proper. Well, that's weird. Why? Yeah. Because Greece is being Greece. So Italia, the state that the rebels had created, called Mithridates VI to help them out. And while that wasn't that big of a deal, Mithridates VI had also called upon Greece to throw off Roman authority. So Sulla went out to fight Mithridates, and Gaius called him back because he didn't want Sulla taking all the glory. So Sulla responded in a way that, he obviously shouldn't have done, but it's really going to set the tone for the end of the Republic. So he marched his army into Rome, which was something you didn't do. When you were successful in war, or even if you weren't, and you came back to Rome, the army dispersed. You don't bring your army into the city. That's not something you do. Sure, they would have parades and whatnot after big victories, but that wasn't the army. That was just a show. So he brings in the active army into the streets of Rome. The citizens get pissed and throw rocks at the army from the rooftops. So Sulla responds by burning their homes to the ground. So Gaius is burning down Rome. Gaius has essentially invaded Rome with a Roman army and is burning down Rome. Did I say Gaius? Sulla. Gaius runs. Gaius Marius runs. Sulla restored order, which when you restore order to a situation like this, it probably very violently restored order. headed east to, I guess, chase down Marius. Um, the people revolted again because, hey, there's nobody home. Let's just revolt, I guess. Um, Marius returned, was elected consul again, then was killed after imposing a reign of terror on Rome. What the hell? There are no good guys in this story. You think, oh wow, Sulla's this monster. It's a good thing we've got Marius. No, Marius is just as bad. He comes back, he gets elected consul, which seems like that means the people want him there. And then he inflicts such a reign of terror on the people that somebody murders him. They get rid of the dude. So I don't know. I mean, the book doesn't go into great detail about this because there's so much other stuff that happens after this. But this single, like, just crazy event. Meanwhile, Sulla's over there defeating Mithridates and regaining Greece to Rome, while Rome is on fire. Yeah, here he is marching into Rome, fighting his way into Rome, as it says here, which is not something a Roman army is supposed to do. I mean, I would say something about like driving tanks down the road in DC, but whatever. The world's insane now. Anyway. So Sulla comes back. Cinna, who was Marius' co-consul, was also assassinated. Because I guess nobody wanted either of them there. And I don't know if necessary. Oh, sorry. No, Sulla was on the way back, and they got rid of Cinna. I guess they didn't want the whole thing. Sulla marched his way into the city with his army again. So, sure, let's just do it a second time. Why not? Proclaimed himself liberator and took the title of dictator by force. So, let's just break all the rules. Let's march into Rome with an army. Let's take a title that's supposed to be reserved for emergencies. Just because. Let's just declare. Let's just say it. God, I really hate this. Let's just say there's an emergency so that we can use emergency powers to gain more power. Promise I'm talking about Rome. Took the title of dictator by force, used the power to get rid of his rivals. One senator pleaded with Sulla, asking him to end this uncertainty of who would live and die, so Sulla made a list of 40 senators and 1,600 equestrians, most of whom were Marius' supporters. So if you supported the guy that Sulla didn't like, he was going to kill you. Once he killed everyone he didn't like, he abolished all the reforms that the Gracchi brothers had instituted. So all the stuff that we talked about before that had basically snowballed into this mess was now just completely taken away. So all the reforms that were helping people actually get land, or breaking up these huge plantations, just completely gotten rid of. And after this, Sulla retired. Despite the madness that he unleashed on Rome from the start, really. Um, he apparently didn't feel like being dictator for life. He just left. I mean, I don't know how he didn't end up getting assassinated, but I guess that's why he decided to retire, because he saw how short the lifespan was for people imposing terror on Rome. So yeah, Jesus. Um, so there he is coming back. People are just exhausted. Um, I'm going to try to quickly get through these last couple. Normally, I just go ahead and let us out early, but I'm going to try to get through these last couple of parts so we can get to Caesar next time. Um, so Pompey was a guy who was attached to Sulla during his campaigns, which is to say he was part of Sulla's army, um, but he was like a higher up um, commander that eventually got his own group to command. And he was really good at being where he needed to be when he needed to be there. Um, his main claim to fame was he was there to help finish off Spartacus's slave rebellion. If you're not familiar with Spartacus, quick overview. He was a Thracian slave, forced to fight as a gladiator. He and 78 slaves broke free of their gladiatorial training camp. Turns out when you train people to fight, they're really good at fighting. Um, they soon had a massive force that defeated 9 Roman armies over the course of 2 years, which is insane. One of Rome's wealthiest men, Crassus, went with 6 legions to fight against these slaves, crushed the majority of them, and crucified thousands along the road to Rome. Pompey managed to show up and overtake the rebels that were escaping, and both men were made consuls in 70 BCE. I am going to bring up a thing about Crassus in a little bit. Well, next time, I guess. They then sent Pompey out to fight Mithridates VI, but Mithridates preferred to kill his family and himself rather than be captured, which, considering what Rome does to their captives, I don't blame the guy. So Pompey extended Rome's holdings all the way to the Euphrates, which was good for Rome. Here's Spartacus from Stars, I guess, from years ago now. Yeah, whatever. Okay. And then just a quick thing here between Cicero and Catiline. Cicero was a master orator from the equestrian line. He was a consul in 63, defeated the patrician Catiline. Catiline was not a good loser, so the next year when he lost again, which again, Cicero, you're not supposed to be consul more than once, but nothing matters anymore. He began hatching a scheme to murder the consuls and take control of Rome. However, Cicero, being savvy to how Rome works, had spies all over the city, discovered Catiline's plans. The Senate was warned. Catiline escaped to the countryside, tried to raise an army. However, Cicero led a force out to kill Catiline and stop the fight before it even started. Now, the reason I bring this up is just to show how bad things were in the late Republic. Aristocrats had their power and wealth damaged, and they were willing to do just about anything to get back to their former state. Now, It's not to say the aristocrats were like out on the streets and completely destitute, but they were slightly less rich and powerful than they were before. So they were willing to literally murder a guy to get power in order to gain their old ways back. This is the level of desperation that you see among those who have had power for so long that any shift feels like an attack. So here's Cicero, very famous orator. I mean, I think I've mentioned this before, but like I took an American history course back in grad school. It was called Classical America. We're basically talking about like the founding fathers and how they based a lot of what they were building on, like Athens and Rome and whatnot. And a lot of the founding fathers, especially like Jefferson, he was a big, massive nerd. When they would write to each other, and they'd write letters to each other, they would use pen names. Just names that weren't theirs, just as sort of a, oh my God, to use modern day parlance, like your screen name online or your gamer tag. If God, is that just Xbox? PS, does PlayStation use gamer tag? I don't know. I use PC, so it's just whatever mine. Regardless, it's sort of like your alias. And back then, or at least the founding fathers, their pen names were these guys, were these Roman and Greek like orators or great thinkers. And I want to say, and I don't remember if this is exactly correct, but I want to say that Thomas Jefferson used Cicero as his pen name, because he was so enamored with this guy. I mean, we don't go into it too much in this book, but like Cicero was like the guy when it came to speaking and writing and whatnot in ancient Rome. Anyway, I think that's it for, because then we get to Caesar, so we'll do that next week, next Monday, because today's Wednesday. That'll do it. So that worked out. That worked out all right. All right, see y'all later then.